Well, let's take you back now to one of our top stories tonight. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana making a commitment for a new relief plan for 2023 regarding Eskom with strict conditions attached. The minister has kept the country's purse shut from the struggling parastatal for this year during his delivery of the medium-term budget policy statement. Let's speak to Gibs Business School Professor Adrian Saville. Adrian, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. So when we look just more broadly at the announcement made by the finance minister taking on 2/3 of Eskom's debt, how much of a difference are you expecting that to make to the entity?
It makes a material difference, and what it does is it moves Eskom from being overwhelmingly unfundable and in accounting language bankrupt to being financially far more solvent, fundable, and that starts to move an important part of Eskom's problem, because if you think about this absolutely critical utility, it is fundamentally important to get Eskom fixed for the South African economy to get into any type of respectable shape. And there are at least three problems with Eskom. The one is its financing, the shape and nature of its balance sheet. The second is its operations, and the third is its technology. So by moving the debt off of Eskom's balance sheet onto the government balance sheet, which for all intents and purposes has actually been there, government ultimately stands behind Eskom. So this is an accounting sleight of hand, but it provides a lot more confidence and clarity to the funding of Eskom. And so I think that that's an important needle mover.
Eskom has been talking a lot about sustainability, what its future looks like, including the kind of projects that it would want to be spending the bulk of its finances on going forward. A lot of that have to do with investments in the renewable space. Do you think that this move is actually going to force a much more certain conversation to be taking place, not just with Eskom, but I think with the various shareholders around what then should happen next in as far as projects that are going to be funded?
Well, if you talk about the shareholders as things stand, ultimately it is government, the state, that is the shareholder of Eskom, and remains as things stand, the sole shareholder. That doesn't change the fact, as you suggest, that there is a much bigger conversation to be had. And I think there's a couple of elements around this that really matter. The first is the type of industrial restructuring that we will get, breaking the utility up into its three parts, from generation all the way through to retail distribution. That's a very important part of the structural reform of Eskom. The second is the way in which the private sector, and especially renewable energy private sector partners, join the generation industry, and that I think is a part of the economy that, if we are looking for silver linings in what is a very, very dark environment, this really stands out as a part of the economy that's got incredible potential and sits inside of a strong regulatory and legal framework with a very keen investment appetite. And then the third is ways in which we ultimately change not just the single entity Eskom into these more functional subsets, but also if that might eventually translates into different ownership. And I have no doubt that different ownership would put renewable energy as a central part of the conversation about a viable Eskom for a very long time.
So Eskom gets a lifeline, but of course, in the end, no such thing as a free lunch. What does this mean for the country's then financial position overall?
Well, that question is being posed, or that observation is being made at the same time that when we've had the medium-term budget policy statement read today, the Minister of Finance has noted that it looks like we're at peak debt and to GDP. And this is a substantial improvement, a material improvement from where we were during the most stressed parts of the pandemic of 2020. And it looked like South Africa was rapidly heading into 80 or 90% debt to GDP. There's been a meaningful turnaround in the health of South Africa's fiscus. This has been helped by very strong commodity prices, and just over the course of the last 12 months, that's translated into 90 billion rand in, I could call it, windfall revenue. And so there's been a meaningful repair in South Africa's balance sheet, national balance sheet. So that affords a little bit of wiggle room in being able to help Eskom by moving the debt off of Eskom's balance sheet onto the government balance sheet. What it doesn't take away is the fact that South Africa remains a long way off the pace in terms of the much promised and much needed structural reforms. But this is this is an important step as part of correcting Eskom or righting Eskom goes.
Speaking about just some of the broader context that we're dealing with as a country, the overall growth for the financial year has been, it's been cast downward, and that of course speaks to the fact that our economy is simply not growing. The unemployment levels remain significantly high. How much pressure do you think that this is going to continue putting on government, especially when it comes to social spending? Because there are these big ticket items that keep eating at a chunk of the budget, despite the fact that even aspects such as revenue collection is showing up much better than expectations.
Kathy, we've spoken about this a couple of times in the past, and the first point that I think is not being acknowledged as explicitly is that the additional revenue of the 90 billion and the improvement in South Africa's debt to GDP, the healthier fiscal state that we find ourselves in, is not the result of discipline and efficiency. It's actually the result of a commodity price windfall, which means it is not the doing of South Africa. It is good fortune, and we should not confuse that with effectiveness and efficiency. And a concern that I have is that it is being confused. At the same time, to add to that a cynical observation is this windfall gain has afforded a refresh of the social relief grant. South Africa sits with incredibly strained social fabric. So I'm not taking away from the importance of the social relief grant, but it seems to have been snuck in the back door that the social relief grant was initially brought in during the pandemic, 44 billion spend, and it was then refreshed, and it's now been refreshed another time. And after a couple of refreshes, it starts to look like it's a permanent feature. And so I have to wonder aloud whether South Africa hasn't, just quietly been taken into the realm of a permanent basic income grant. Now, if done well, that could be a very, very powerful social welfare tool. And we could look to places like Brazil, who've been very effective with these types of programs. If done badly, this could be another threat or stress to South Africa's fiscus. And then all of this happens at a time that we have the public sector wage negotiations going on.
All right. So certainly then to still continue to unpack out of that mini budget, as it's often referred to, Professor Adrian Saville is with the Gibs Business School. Thank you for your time tonight.